Okay, let me shift the topic here a little bit. One of the reasons why I invited you today was because I thought that your presentation at the Singularity Summit was perhaps the funniest, most cheerful, and strangely enough, perhaps most optimistic
Yes.
uh,
Thank you.
presentations. So even though that's clearly, a summit of optimists, people who hope to live forever, still I think for a skeptic you're incredibly optimistic.
I am
How
by
is that
nature.
possible to be a skeptic and an optimist, and why? Perhaps you can explain a little bit more
Well,
about that.
I'm pro science, and so first of all, by temperament, I'm optimistic anyway. But being pro science, it's easy to be optimistic because things really have gotten better. So my point on the social singularity, my talk at Singularity Summit was to actually look at, instead of pie in the sky things that are going to happen in the next century or so, let's look at what actually has happened, and not in the areas that everybody else has already done, although those are all great. It's just I wanted to look at something different, which is how much better life has gotten for so many more people. Okay, so nobody's made it to the 100 past the 120-year barrier. However, most people in the Middle Ages died at, at an early age because of disease and so forth, and most people before us lived in dirt poverty. I mean, hardly anybody lived like King Louis XIV did, with his several hundred servants and so on. But even he had no better life than the average person today. So something has happened, that is, more people in more places more of the time live like better than King Louis XIV did just a couple centuries ago.
Hmm.
So although he had several hundred servants, you can walk down to your local Starbucks and there is a barista waiting for you to make you your venti latte right now. They're waiting there. Just ride your bike down there and get your latte. Or you go to the electronics store and they have a television just for you. They made it just for you in China and shipped it over to Toronto and it's waiting there for you. In other words, something has happened socially that I think has already achieved something like what the Singularity likes to describe in this huge breakthrough: wealth, freedom, power, liberty, autonomy for billions of people that did not exist before. And so I think that's worth celebrating.
So let me see if I can connect this back to our original topic then. During your presentation, you showed a number of exponential curves,
Yeah.
precisely supporting your argument about the social singularity. And they were things like, the growth of GDP, violence, mortality, and things like that. Well, isn't it in a funny way, all those exponentially growing curves, aren't they in a funny way supporting the singularity argument? Perhaps you're not willing to take it as far as Ray and the other people are, but in a way it's pointing towards the same direction, isn't it?
Okay. First of all, let me say I'm glad people like Ray are doing what they're doing. We need big thinking visionaries to throw stuff out there that is, most of it probably is not going to happen. But if we don't think about it, it definitely won't happen. So I'm glad somebody's working on it. It's just that my job as a skeptic is to just say, wait a minute, okay, yeah, I hope you're right, but could be this, could be that, and just try to have a reality check once in a while. I'm all for it. Believe me, I'm not religious, so as far as I know, when I die, it's gone. My pattern is gone forever. So I'm not particularly crazy about that scenario. So I hope you're right. But the fact that I want it to be true doesn't make it true. So we have to have that reality check. So given that proviso, I think I'm glad you guys are doing what you're doing, and do more of it, as long as it's science based and there's some arguments to be made based on data and reason and so forth. And I like all the curves. How much farther we can go, I think we can get a truly global economy in which there are no economic borders. I mean, economic borders, that's just tribalism. That's just, we want to keep our jobs in our little tribe and not let you have our jobs. That's an old way of thinking, that there's a fixed pie of wealth, and that if your slice is slightly bigger, that means my slice is slightly smaller. Okay, a singularity way of thinking about that is, no, the pie keeps growing and growing
Yeah,
and growing, so all of our slices get bigger. So I'm on board
abundance.
with that. Yeah, so I do think that in the long run, the scenarios that the singularity people are describing will not happen if the social singularity doesn't happen with it. Just take back to jet aircraft. You know, how much faster can they fly? Politically, no faster than the speed of sound. You won't be allowed to fly faster than the speed of sound because of the shock wave that goes across. Okay, so you're going to have to go into space to get around the political restraint. And so there are those things. And you know, as uplifting as it is to live in the West and talk about these things, we have to remember that there's a good many governments around the country or around the world who would like nothing better than to go back to a fourth century theocracy where women have no rights. They're just no better than cattle, and that science and technology is the demon, is the enemy of truth, right? So we have to stay vigilant about some basic boots on the ground, basic freedoms and liberties that none of the technological scientific breakthroughs of singularity will have any effect at all if we don't have the political economic system that allows it to grow. That was sort of my point of my talk.
And I'm very sympathetic to many of your you know, social libertarian ideas and market freedom and things like that. But let me ask you about a couple of points that you make there about the social and political barriers to change and the ability of the majority to stop certain events or things from happening. Is that really the case? Take, for example, cloning. If we have political and social and religious opposition to cloning in a number of countries across the world, will we be able to prevent that from happening?
Well, well, at the moment there are restrictions on that, and I think the way around that is more piecemeal, smaller steps to get people used to it. Like I'm old enough to remember when in vitro fertilization came online in the 80s. There was much hue and cry about this, that man should not play God, and that you know these natural abortions that happen, all this is God's way of, and that we're trying to tinker with God's, you know. Okay, well, as soon as that technology got to be accepted and people were using it, then nobody objected anymore. And I think in the long run, even something like cloning would be acceptable as long as it happened in a stepwise fashion, and you sort of let the religious people get used to it, and they could see the direct medical benefits to it, especially congressmen who are old and dying, where they could see some actual medical breakthroughs for themselves personally, then they're going to vote for it. So I'm not pessimistic about that. I just think that those barriers are there. We have to deal with the political barriers, religious barriers,
and I agree with that. So we're getting towards the end of our interview here, but I have about 3 questions left. So let me just ask you a little bit on a tangent, but it's interesting because it's another very big issue. Are you skeptical about global warming, or what's your take on that idea?
Yeah, it depends what you mean by global warming. Okay, so in general,
is climate change caused by the things that humans as a civilizations do to cause it?
I think in general we are having some effect, a measurable effect on the environment. I'm optimistic that it is not as bad as people say it is. I think there's a lot of doomsday preaching in the environmentalist movement that bothers me. It is a little bit like a religion in the sense of of portraying the apocalyptic end of the world, Armageddon's happening because of global warming. I don't think that's the case. I do think there's time for market forces to operate and allow entrepreneurs who can figure out new technologies and make money solving environmental problems, that's the way to go, rather than a top-down Manhattan Project-sized government-based program to solve our problems. I do think that electric cars and alternative sources of energy, those sorts of things, are the long-term solution. In any case, in terms of thinking like a singularitarian, that in the long run, on that sort of type 1, type 2, type 3 civilization, we do have to get off of fossil fuels. That's a pre-type 1 civilization source of energy. that in the long run we have to do this anyway. So if the doomsdayers scare us into pushing the technology faster, I think that's okay. I just worry about the doomsdayers encouraging politicians to do too much in the way that could actually slow us down. I'd rather have the great genius inventors of the world solving these problems rather than government bureaucrats. So in general, I think global warming is probably real, at least partially human caused. I don't think we can say for sure what the long-term consequences will be, how much warmer it's going to get, what the consequences will be of that. And therefore, especially given the economic problems we already have, that spending trillions of dollars to lower greenhouse gases by a tiny little percent that would lower the global temperature by a fraction of 1 degree in the next century, I don't think that's a good use of our money.
The last two questions that I traditionally ask of my guests on the show are as follows. The first one is, where can our viewers and listeners who want to find more about you and your work do so?
Oh, skeptic.com is the webpage to go to for sure. I mean, there's a michaelshermer.com, my own personal webpage, but skeptic.com is pretty much a clearinghouse for everything. Our new project that I'm working on is the skeptical curriculum program. That is, I want to take skepticism into the classroom more than it's already there. Already there's professors all over the country teaching courses that are like skepticism. I just taught one called Skepticism 101 at Chapman University. It was a great experience, and we're going to create a web page that's a clearinghouse. It's a little bit like TED.com, where you have all these free videos, except we're going to have videos, PowerPoint presentations, lectures, course syllabi, reading lists, projects, illusions, magic tricks, student research projects, things like that, such that if you want to teach skepticism at your university, you can just go to our webpage and pull down all the things you need to do so and implement it. And I think in the long run, that the spread of skeptical scientific reasoning, that's the best hope we have for humanity. So I'm trying to do my little share by making that more official in an academic setting. Make every university and college should have a course on skepticism, teaching people how to think.
I agree entirely with that, and I'm entirely in support of it. Personally, though, I want to ask you this. The question that arises from that is this. Once you've established your skeptical predisposition or way of interrogating the universe, how do you counterbalance that with the need to follow the evidence no matter where it takes you? Right? Because if you're too skeptical, then to a certain point you prevent all progress from happening.
Well, although humans have built-in cognitive biases, science itself is designed to get around those, such that it doesn't matter if you're too skeptical or I'm not skeptical enough or vice versa. It doesn't matter. The community at large of scientists working will eventually get the right answer. That the competitive nature of science is what gives us hope that despite all the politics of science and all the biases and the psychology of knowledge and all that, that the community at large will keep those biases in check, such that if you don't look out for your own biases, somebody else will. And that's what gives me hope about science, is that it's a community process that is designed to work around those problems.
So perhaps that could lead us to the very last question, which I always ask, and which is, do you have a single message, the most important message that you would like our viewers and listeners to take away from this interview with you today? What would that be?
It would be, don't be fooled, and you're the easiest person to be fooled. That is, we should all be skeptical, even of the skeptics in ourselves, and just always be on the alert of how to think about these different claims, and watch out for those biases, including our own, because they're very powerful.
That's fantastic. Dr. Michael Shermer, thank you very much for taking time to be with us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you.